This conference will now be recorded.
This conference will be recorded. I'm going to introduce Victor Wolford, and he is going to talk to you about his great selling techniques. Come on up.
Is anybody able to see my picture on there? I hope not.
All right, so how you doing?
Good. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a mess. All right, how's my hair look?
Perfect as always.
So, thank you. So, I know we touched on this a few weeks earlier with regards to some sales training that I've had in my background, but we wanted to explore, just based on some of the feedback, a little more in-depth perspective of it. And how it works. And I apologize for those of you who aren't here in person. I have a handout that I'll leave some extra copies here at the office so that people can have them if you're ever in the office and want to pick one up. But one of the unique things about getting your real estate license is they teach you so many different things about the law, but they don't bother to teach you anything about how to sell a house or the process to sell a house. And so what I found was that the accuracy that I received in our real training was accurate in that they said this has a 90% failure rate in real estate. And lo and behold, we had 33 people in my class 8 years ago, which can't believe it's been years now. And we're down to 3 of us that still practice. So it's been pretty accurate. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that most people who get their real estate license don't have a sales background or sales training background. And so I learned this technique, somebody please. You'll hear the
Somebody mute. Thank you.
There we go. All right. So, as I mentioned, I was taught this technique over 20 years ago. And one of the beautiful things about it is it's really been timeless in that I've been able to adapt it to every single application I've had throughout my sales or sales management career. And so it's really a beautiful technique that allows you to cater it to whatever you're doing, but then more importantly, you can make it your own. What I do doesn't have to be the same thing that you do, right? But there's a process. And if you just follow the process, you can adapt it to your own liking. And so the first part of this, it's basically a 5-step process. And for those of you who have heard this part before, the acronym is PIPPC. It's purpose, introduction, probing, presenting, and then closing. Okay, in that order, always. But again, you can adapt this to however you want. And so the first is called the purpose. And really, this is, in my opinion, the most important step in the entire process, because what you're doing, right, is you're setting the expectation. You're letting these people know that you're going to be asking for their business at the end of the event, and you're gaining their buy-in as a result of doing so. These people that we're meeting with, every scenario is different, whether it's relocation, you're going on a random listing appointment from a referral, it doesn't matter. You can adapt this to whatever situation you're in. And so I will give you the purpose that I use on most all of my listing appointments. And again, this is just something that I've created that I've adapted, but that doesn't mean it has to be the one that you use, but it needs to be able to roll off your tongue, and it needs to be something that you're comfortable saying. And so how I always come in with the purpose of our meeting is, I'll say, with your permission, this is what I was hoping we could accomplish today. I want to give a little bit of background about myself, my experiences with White, but more importantly, I want to learn a little more about your goals and what you're trying to accomplish with getting your hold and what your needs might be. And from there, I'm going to tell you what I think I can do and Weicker can do to make that happen for you. And at the end of our meeting, if you feel like I'm a good fit and all the pegs are in place, I'm going to ask you to sign the paperwork and we can move forward with getting your home listed. Or if not, I understand it too. I'm not always going to be the best fit for everyone, and we can part ways at that point. Or lastly, if there's additional questions that I need to answer or additional information you need, I would just ask that we get back together and set a second appointment to go over those things. Does that sound fair? Okay with you? I mean, again, we're putting in closes. I know you've heard me mention this before, but we're just trying to gain permission at that point, and it just has to roll off your tongue. And every situation, again, is going to be different, but that's one that I typically use. It's actually funny. I noticed myself doing it this morning. So I got up this morning, I was getting ready, and my wife was having her coffee. And I said, hey, honey, what's your schedule look like today? And she went through what she had going on. And I said, okay, well, here's what I've got going on today. I said, I've got to give this presentation, our sales meeting this morning. And then from there, I'm going to go show a couple of houses. Then I'm going to grab a bite to eat. And then when I get back here, maybe we can get this furniture moved. We've got the wallpaper person coming tomorrow, and we can get everything ready for her so she doesn't get held up. I said, does that sound fair? Is that okay? She was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm like, sweet. All right. So again, I find myself doing this, in every application of life, not just this. So it's kind of, but the purpose is to set the introduction and buying from you, okay? With the goal being either a yes or a second. That's. And again, you're wanting to use trials to get acceptance from your sellers or buyers, whoever you're working for that matter. So you want to see the head. That makes sense. Yes. Does that work for you? Yes. That's what you're really looking for. Does anyone have any questions about the purpose? Again, I know it's an important step, and it kind of has to flow off the tongue pretty fluidly. You don't want it to sound rehearsed by any means. And of course, I'm up here speaking in front of a bunch of people. So. It absolutely can. So Allison's was ever use this as an invitation to set up a second appointment to come back and do your presentation? Yes, that can absolutely be one of the implications of this. And again, all depends on the appointment. So if I'm in a location setting and I know I have the opportunity to make a second appearance, I'm going to do it, and that's where I will use that, setting that expectation of coming back the second time. But that's not always the case, and what we're finding with relocation from time to time is we really don't have a second shot, right? So I have to adapt it, based on that. So that answer your question? Okay. So the second piece is the introduction, and this is where you're really just sort of giving some background about yourself. What is your story? And everybody's story is going to be different. My story is not the same as your story or your story. I mean, everyone's going to be different. And so, my introduction looks something like this. Born and raised here in Louisville, graduated from the University of Louisville in 1998 with a degree in economics, went into the corporate world, spent about 18 years in either a sales or sales management capacity, had a lot of great successful years, but not really any fulfilling ones for me. And I still was one of those scenarios where I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I actually got online, took 3 different career assessment profiles, and overwhelmingly, all 3 of them came back and said, you either need to sell real estate or go to culinary school and become a chef. Everything else was way down here, okay? So it was the most eye-opening experience for me. Obviously, the path of least resistance was to get into real estate. I could make my own schedule that way. And so that was 8 years ago, and the rest is history. And can go into why I chose Likert, and I can get back into that in part of the presentation portion as well. But that's a short and sweet of an introduction without getting into too much detail. Although, I can also incorporate, my wife and I had 2 sets of twins. That grabs their attention. You know, you can go that path. It just depends on the timing and how the fluidity of the presentation. Does anyone else have a unique story about themselves like you guys do to introduce yourself when you're talking to a client? Like what's your spiel, so to speak? Does anyone want to share before I call on someone? Amy Sager, I know you got a story.
Uh-oh.
She's like, what? I wasn't listening.
What do you mean?
All right.
A story.
Like, what's your story when you're meeting with a client you've never met with before? Like, what do you tell them about your background? Yeah, absolutely. About rapport building and sort of letting them know your background and your experiences.
Am I echoing?
A little bit.
Okay.
By a little bit, I mean a lot.
Damn. Okay. Am I still echoing?
Now you sound good. Now you sound great.
Okay. I always let people know I was born in Louisville. Love Louisville. I've lived in lots of parts of Louisville. And I always tell them that I wanted to do real estate since I was like 14. And my mom would take me to open houses. I'd circle what I wanted to see in the paper and go look at them. And I was interested in what made people want a home, what it looked like in the area, the pricing,
All that kind of stuff.
So it's always intrigued me.
Okay.
That's my story.
Does anyone else want to share a story? I promise I'm calling anybody else out. All right, whoever, everybody hit me, please, because let's see if there's a lot of feedback. There we go. Perfect. All right. So we've covered the purpose and we've covered the introduction. The next phase is what we call the probing phase. And this is really where you have the opportunity to kind of dig in and learn more about your clients and sort of what their needs are and what their goals are with selling the house. And again, needs and goals are different things, right? So we really establish, what steps need to be taken in order to make this a successful listing. So I've put together a list of questions that I use, but I would love to get some feedback afterwards on other questions that you guys might use out there in the field if you have them. But some of the questions that I use, for example, what made you decide to move? Another big one is, what does your timeline look like? Because again, everybody's on different timelines too, and it's really important, how you maneuver through this process based on how much time they have as well, with regards to selling their house. What your past experiences look like working with agents. Some people may have a bad experience, and then you need to know it, and you need to know why they had a bad experience, right? Because you might be able to overcome that objective with them, so they just group you with being the same person that's their last house. Improvements have you made to this home? I talk about what things you've done to this house that may be a bad value. We can look. What type of budget do you have in case we need to make additional repairs or additional improvements? That's kind of a big one. And again, that'll flow into the timeline that you have as well, with regard to listing a home, right? Because there are some projects that take longer than others, and if somebody's need to get their home on the market immediately, well, then you may need to improvise a little bit, right? Do you have contractors available? Do you have someone that you like working with? If not, let me be your resource. I have folks that can help in some of these areas. How do you feel about open houses? We assume a lot of times that everyone we meet with wants us to do an open house because we believe in them. We know how they work, but that's not always the case, right? So we really need upfront how they feel about them, and if they're not a big proponent of it, we may not necessarily talk them into doing it. Let me share some of my experiences as to why it has worked for us in the past, and if at that point you still don't feel comfortable with it, no worries, we won't do And then what's your past experience been with opens if they've had an experience? So, and again, I can go on and on. There's lots of questions that we ask about that. Joe, do you have a question? Buy this house? Yeah. So that's a great question. Joe said one of the questions that he really likes is what made you want to buy this house when you purchased it? What was the big feature selling for you? Absolutely a great question that I would want to ask him. Al, do you know why that's such a great question?
That's on my list. It's on my list, and the reason why is because if you can find out why they chose the house, then that's what's probably going to intrigue somebody else about that house, and you want to make sure it's mentioned in the remarks. Not only are you going to win brownie points with the seller for doing it, it could very likely be the reason why it sells again. The other thing is, what would you change about this house now that you've lived in it? Because if there's something that you don't like about living in this house, I want to make sure I'm not bringing that up, because the likelihood is somebody else will agree with you. And then the last one is, do you have a price in mind? Because the last thing I want to do is start talking about price when they're up here and I'm down there, or vice versa.
Yeah, and Joe mentioned another one. How did you arrive at that price? The last thing we want to hear is right. Absolutely. So that's those are all great, and obviously the that you received to those questions are really going to dictate how the next phase in the process or next step in the process goes, which is presenting solutions, right? So this is where the door presentation comes in really handy for those of you that aren't comfortable using just your own process. You can go through the doors presentation at this point. It's one of those things I sort of have most of the major high points memorized at this point, and I know how I like to address the things. So I don't always pull out the presentation itself, but I did for years, and it was very helpful. But again, once you sort of commit it to memory, it's not always necessary because, as we know, technology doesn't always hold up if trying to present it on the computer. There can be, but each person might be different here. And so if you want to use the doors presentation, I certainly would encourage people to do that. Like I said, I did it for years. I don't pull it out each now just simply because I have quite a few of those high points already memorized. So, at this point, we're going to present our solutions, right? But before we do so, the one thing I like to talk about up front is, what does the current market look like? And so, that's changing every 3 to 6 months. I'm telling people a different story about what the market's doing, and I think that's important for people to understand, because they may have expectations that the market was doing 6 months ago. That may not apply today to what they're trying to do, and so they need to understand that going forward. The next thing I like to talk about is Weichert and the Weichert tree. And again, this is going to the doors presentation. Weichert's been in business since the late 60s. We do business in almost every single in the U.S. now and globally. We are an international company. One of the main features that drew me to Weichert was the use of technology. As I always tell people, people aren't buying their home through looking in the newspaper anymore like they used to. And so I wanted to work for a company that really embraced technology, and Weichert has done so. One of the things they do that's a little different than any other company that I love is we actually have a corporate call center out of our headquarters in New Jersey, so that if any buyers on one of our websites, and we have numerous, if any buyers on one of our websites looking for a property and they come across your property and they click on it, there's a button there where they can click to talk to a live person to get answers about this question. And why that's important to you is because while they're talking to that in our corporate center who knows a lot about our house, there's a separate dialer going on in the back that's reaching out to my phone. And if I don't answer, it's going to the next Weichert agent and then the next Weichert agent until a live person picks up the phone. And so that we can capture that buyer and help sell them on your house, right? And so you can go into as much or a little detail about that as you would like. I also talk about, Weichert owning one of the largest relocation companies in the world. We are constantly moving buyers and sellers in and out of this town based on corporate agreements that we have with national organizations. I go through the open house process and the Weichert open house process that we use. I talk about the different types of photo options that we have available. We can talk about staging. Again, a lot of this goes back to your questions that are answered by the seller and what their real needs are. We can talk about innovation that needs to be done. We can talk about like staging. I even go into talking about our presence on different real estate websites and how we incorporate that and try to bump our listings or make our listings more seen on the websites. So there's a plethora of things that you can go into in the presentation mode. I don't know that we really have time to go through each and every one of them right now, but is there anything else that other people out there are using with regards to how they're presenting to sellers that they'd like to share? Crickets. Just as expected. All right, so that really leads us into the last phase of the process, which is the closing piece. For Mrs. Seller, I mean, at the very beginning of our meeting, I was gonna ask for our business if you felt like everything went well and you felt like we were a good fit. Do you feel comfortable moving forward with the paperwork at this point? Yes or no? I mean, there's really no other answer there. There may be some questions that we didn't answer that we need to address. Do you have any additional questions? Are there things I didn't cover? Are there things that someone covered with you that you like better about that I didn't mention to you? Because I may have forgotten to mention something, right? And so at that point, your goal is to try and get them to sign paperwork. I can't emphasize how important it is to be making meeting with both decision makers at the same time, right? Like that goes back to your prior phone call before you even step a door. Hey, who's going to be joining us, for our meeting next week? Are both going to be present? If they're not and show up and they both can't be there, my presentation changes. It shifts. It's going to be a lot shorter, but it's going to be more concise, and I'm going to try to schedule a second appointment to come back and meet with the parties. Unless that party I met with is like, nah, this isn't a good fit for us. But that's pretty rare, to be quite honest. So again, yes and no, or a second appointment is really all you're hoping to gain there. So that's really about it. Good. Super.
Can you put the screen so we can see what's on the whiteboard a little bit better? Thank you.
Oh, that's actually up there a couple weeks ago.
No, I understand.
Oh, did you just do that?
I
Okay.
did. So what do you do when you go on this solicitation?
Well, listing paperwork first and foremost, number one. I will take the doors presentation with me, but again, if I feel like it's going to be useful, helpful, I'll use it, and if I don't, then I won't. But sometimes just having the big packet with you sometimes looks more impressive than it actually be. And I also take in my laptop. One of the things I really like to do while I'm in this presentation, and this again depends on how much time you have and how engaging your client really are, but I actually, they may have a price in mind that they want to use for listing their home, and I, as the professional, may have already put together a presentation of where I think the price should be, but that may not really satisfy them, to be quite honest. So I like to show them directly. I'll actually pull up the MLS while I'm with them and go through pricing, look at homes, photos. This is all stuff they're not really seeing in your comparison a lot of time. So this is why I think this is a comp for your house. This is why I don't think an approach is going to use this comp, for example, and really go through pricing strategy with them and almost basically like doing a BMA on site in a lot of ways. And that tends to be very effective, I've found. Uh-huh.
On the screen in the form of a CMA, or you list chosen comparables. Are you doing it for neighborhood, or are you doing like kind properties, say an area 9 or a zip code?
I'd say that's a little question. I'd say
Why is it trick question?
yeah, it depends. If I feel like there's enough data out there, then yes, I will use neighborhoods, but I really like to go outside of the neighborhood because agents won't do that, and I really want people to understand that we're not just basing this off of what's sold in your neighborhood. I mean, there are other neighborhoods that are very like kind to your neighborhood that will maybe bring a different price point based on what we're seeing, because again, the finishes in your house may look very different from the finishes in other people's homes in this neighborhood. But here's another neighborhood that's very similar to yours with similar finishes that might bring us this kind of price.
I have found that most sellers are typically using past sales to establish value. When I'm coming in, I'm talking about, we got to think like a buyer.
Yeah.
If a buyer's going to come and look at your house, what other houses would that buyer want to go view? That's what I'm really concerned about, how we're going to place it compared to everything else in the market for sale.
Correct. Yeah, the first step I go through is we look at what's active on the market. That's the first thing I look at, especially when I pull my computer in front of a client. I'm also going to look at PIN, what's active under contract, and days on market. Absolutely. Yeah, I really want them to see for themselves with their own eyes, like whether they choose me or not. I had a relocation appointment that unfortunately I didn't win the opportunity to list the house because they already had a relationship and a friendship with the agent that sold them the house 2 years earlier, and I was $25,000 higher on our BMA, not because I was trying to buy the listing, but because I truly felt like the house would sell for $625, and they listed it for $600. It sold the very first day. I'm like, I know they underpriced that house, and that's fine. I got it sold, but I still think that same buyer at 600 would have that house at 625. So I even told him, I said, I know you guys have a relationship. I don't care, whether you decide to go with me or someone else. I truly believe you need to list your house, and if it doesn't generate the activity that you're looking for right away, you can always lower it, right? But I truly feel like this is your price. Yeah, in this market. And I told him, I said, let me pull this up. I pulled up all of the comps from 575,000 to 625,000 in their market area. Guess how many there were?
None.
Zero. Not one. So I think they missed an opportunity there, but that's, neither here nor there.
When you're talking about the presentation part of this, you are talking about kind of going through the doors presentation through memory. You're asking questions about these things as you go. It's not just a delivery.
No, I've already asked the questions in the probing piece.
Okay.
How do you feel about open houses? What have your past experiences been like? Yeah, I mean,
so your responses are based on what they fed you.
Correct. Now, granted, always going to talk about the corporate call center. I'm always going to talk about the corporate relocation, because they're just added benefits that Weichert has a lot of companies out there don't have. But other pieces of it will depend on the responses that I've got.
You mentioned that you're talking to Gail about photos and things like that. Do you mention the Matterport? Do you mention statistics about people looking at photos?
Absolutely.
How they're entered into the MLS, remarks?
And I appreciate you asking the question. I was afraid to go into too much detail with the presentation part. So when we talk about photographs, I say there are a plethora of options that we have available at our fingertips. And here's what I think will work best for your particular situation. And so I always tell, I have a standard photographer that I've been using for years that does amazing. Here's some sample of work, and I'll actually put up existing listings that she's photographed. I say, but we can also take this to the next level. We have this new tech that's out there. A lot of companies don't have right now. It's called a Matterport camera, and here's what it does for your listing. And I'll talk about the dollhouse view and the 3D virtual tour. And I'll explain. Look, I think both of these are valid options, and we use these. I also have the opportunity to bring in a drone photographer. I think it would be a good option for your listing based on this, or I don't think it'll be a good option based on your listing for this. When it comes to photographs, I like to keep it fairly concise. Once you get past 35 pictures or so, people tend to lose interest. I see so many of these listings where they have 200 photos, or 100 photos in the MLS, and I'm like, what? No one in their right mind is going to sit there and click through 100 photos. Yeah.
Shove it online.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I go into a ton of detail about photographing property in particular. So.
You explain the MLS and how it works at all?
Absolutely. Like working with buyers. We'll talk. Well, I'm probably getting off task there. I apologize. But
no.
Well, for example, with working with buyers, I use the MLS as a tool in that all the information they're looking at on Realtor.com, Zillow, and Trulia, all that information is being fed from the MLS. So you're getting the information secondhand, which means A, it's not always reliable, and B, it's not always there fast enough. And so I'm going to set up an automated search for buyers so that you're getting information firsthand and getting it typically faster than you would before it hits a lot of these other real estate.
And I'm talking about that when I'm talking with the seller.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling them that realtors have these searches set up on the MLS, and so it's going to hit if it fits into that criteria.
Yep.
And that's where I can manipulate this, because if I change a photo, change the price, cancel and relist, it's going to hit a hot sheet again, which is going to fall into all those search criteria.
Absolutely.
Saved searches on the MLS. So I'll go through a little more detail on that.
Absolutely.
I talked to them about how they're in charge.
Yeah.
That the listing contract specifically states that they have to allow access to the property, but if they've got something going on, they don't have to just rush around and make the place available just because it's active on the MLS.
Correct.
I work for you. You're going to be in charge and tell me when it's able to be shown.
Absolutely. I agree with all those parts, and I'll take that one step further with regards to price. I'm a big proponent of properties at a specific dollar amount, and I don't mean like $499.9 or $5. I'm gonna price that house at $500,000, and the reason we do that is we want to try to capture buyers when they run their searches online. If I price your house at $499 and I've got a buyer that's looking at $500 to $525, your listing's within their range really, but it's not going to go up because we priced it at $499.9. So if I price your home at $500,000, we're going to capture all the buyers that are looking $450 to $500, and we're also going to capture all the buyers that are looking $500 to $525 or $550 for that matter. So yeah, people like to make this whole marketing argument that pricing it at $499.9, makes it feel less expensive. Well, really,
if you're walking down the aisle,
right.
you can see it in your face.
Yeah.
Right.
But when you're looking online and now your home doesn't come up and 50% buyers out there that are searching in that price point, now there's a problem, right? So it's just little marketing tips like that that I think really help separate us.
I don't want an agent to come through here unless you're here too.
Okay. I am happy to accommodate a request, but I will tell you my experience owning houses with the buyers or with the listing agent there. My buyers a lot of times won't feel comfortable being able to walk through the house and make comments and really talk about how they feel about the house, and that doesn't really do you any good. We really want to get proper feedback, and really the only person they're going to give that feedback to is their agent. That agent will read that feedback to us. And sometimes it can be a timing issue. I don't want us to miss on on a showing opportunity because I can't be there for a showing because I'm already showing someone else a house and someone wants to see your house at this time. As a matter of fact, that happened to me this past weekend. I'm working with a buyer who wanted to see a $750,000 house, and the listing agent wouldn't let us in because she only wants the house on the hour. She wouldn't take, like a 6:30 showing. She wanted to show it at 6 or at 7, which didn't work with our schedule. And quite honestly, that house is still not sold, and my buyers don't even want to go look at it now because she was so difficult to try and get us in.
Wow.
So because she felt like she needed to be there for every showing.
So what's the safety aspect of this? If you're not going to be there to protect my house, am I comfortable letting another realtor come in?
Yeah, well, we're licensed agent, so that agent has a license tag. They're not going to bring someone in here who's pre-qualified yet to make sure they're a viable buyer. And secondly, they're not just going to let the buyer water the house. So if something happens, at your house, and I'm not saying it's never happened, but it's certainly very rare. That agent is going to be there with their buyers.
How they get in?
Yeah, we have a Supra that we put on the front door, which is basically a high-tech lockbox that only works with an application on your phone that you have to subscribe to, and you have to be a licensed agent even to have access to that. So, they're exactly. It's going to record exactly.
Do you bring up financing at all?
Absolutely, yeah. Financing is a huge proponent of, especially negotiating how we work with a particular buyer.
So that's in the presentation part.
It can be. It's not always, but I don't go through it a ton. That's
And I think some of the selling aspects of trying, especially if you're in a position where you're up against other realtors, I will typically bring up finance and inspections because part of the benefit of having someone who's ins and outs of the contract is going to be somebody that's going to look at these contracts and say, this one's U.S. Bank or BB&T, this one's a local mortgage company, this one's FHA, that one's VA, this one's 30% down, this one's 3.5% down. How did this affect your decision-making process? So I will bring that up because that's kind of benefit I feel I bring to the table, where most people are just chasing. You got to take the first offer because you'll never get a better one than the first one. How often has a seller heard that? I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I will let people right up front, 5 days on market, I don't care. It's about you. You want it today? I can do it. You want to fit the highest price and the best to make sure it actually to the closing table? It might take a few days or a week or 2 or 10. You're in charge, I work for you, and I'll help you make that decision. The other thing is inspections. Are you walking through the property with these people on the first visit and making a note of the things that need to be addressed before you put it on the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, when I go on listing appointment, I actually walk around the outside of the house first before I even go inside. And that way we can broach that subject while I'm there if I see something that needs attention. But again, it also goes back to the seller's needs, for example. And so that would come up in the presentation. Hey, I noticed this about the house. I think it would be important that we get this taken care of prior to listing it because it's going to come up in inspections. And sometimes this can really cause, an issue depending on what the circumstances.
Might be something we want to address before we put it on the market.
Absolutely.
So I have had people ask me, to repaint the basement or recarpet a bedroom or something to that effect. How do you handle those conversations?
Well, I can only share my experiences working with buyers in those instances. And again, it depends on how the seller feels about all of these things. I will explain to them, like, this may or may not add value, but it's certainly going to be a selling feature, and it's certainly going to attract more people to your house. I have had lots of buyers walk away from a house because they saw the carpet was filthy, which tells them, maybe don't care about the house. Yeah, exactly. And that may not be the reality, but that's the perceived notion.
Unless it's something that's drastic that needs to be fixed, save your money for the one you're buying.
Yeah.
If it's a reoccurring issue, that we're getting feedback about this particular problem, then we can address it. But I hate for you to go and put in new carpeting in the basement when somebody comes in right behind you and puts in laminate.
And, you know, if people are uber worried about carpet, I'll always defer to cleaning it first before trying to replace it, because less expensive option, a little less invasive. I actually had an example listing just not even 3 months ago where they had 2 huge dead trees in front of the house. And the reality was you never really noticed the trees because you were focused on looking at the house. So I said, let's wait until after inspections. We know about it already. Let's wait, see what they say in inspections. It may not be a big deal to that buyer, or their inspector may not even bring it up to them. And so let's not spend thousands of dollars removing trees right now unless we know we have to.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Point it out and say it's probably going to come up on an inspection, but as soon as you fix it, the buyer's going to be a licensed electrician and he could have done himself and it wasn't an issue. So I go back to my job is to make you aware of these things that may come down the pike, but let's not spend the money till we have to. I'm just warning you. Something else I was going to add to that. Lost my train of thought. Oh, the leave behind. You ever leave a leave behind?
Very rarely.
Very rarely. Right. The reason why I bring up this financing and inspections and whether you're spending money, that sort of thing, because in the leave behind, it has those pages that say showcasing your home and how to present it for showings. And so if I'm going to leave that behind, I kind of want to touch on that and how the house is going to look to the general public, and it's about turning on the lights and making it smell good and cleaning off the counters. I like leaving the leave behind, so I'm not the one that is criticizing the way their house appears to the general public. It's in writing. But I am going to touch on it so that when I'm aware of what I'm handing them, I guess.
And, you know, that you do.
I don't tell people to do that. I know a lot of that's a great point, Joe. A lot of people will say you need to make this a neutral house and take down all your family photos. I'm of the opinion that a house full of family photos shows aura. It's warm, it's welcoming.
Yeah.
I just sold a house on Nottingham, and the buyers came through the open house, and they said, we saw all the Bibles lying around, and it just felt like it was such a warm and happy home. We really want to buy this house.
Yeah.
Same goes with family photos. Now, if they're naked, might mention it.
I actually did have a negligee picture at one of my listings on a dresser that you know, Allison, something just a minute ago that reminded me, one of the big hot buttons right now obviously is COVID. And so when you're in a listing presentation, you want to ask what their feelings are on COVID, because we can approach this from a very conservative standpoint, or we can be very aggressive. I actually had to show a house yesterday, and the listing agent was required to be at all showings. She was doing temperature checks. She was making sure we wore masks. I think it's a bit extreme, but your sellers may not feel that. That may be what they consider standard protocol, and that's what they want done with everyone coming through the house. So really, you need to base that on what their opinions of the COVID situation are. So, I mean, obviously, we're going to our verbiage and the agent notes, you know, adhere to COVID guidelines, but you know, how far do we really take that? Are we leaving gloves at the house? Are we leaving extra masks at the house? What is our seller's expectation of it?
It's also a good opportunity to tell them how this process is going to go, and that the home inspector was going to prefer to be there by himself without all of the family and friends in tow, and that it's a reminder to me that I'll ensure that that's the way it goes down. I've been having a reoccurring text message banter with an agent who wants to bring in painters and carpet people, and this is an older lady, and she was scared to death of COVID. She's got brand new grandbabies, and she doesn't want anyone in her house. And technically, the buyer's agent doesn't have the right to request this. They should wait until the walkthrough, which I think she's finally figured out. Sure. But certainly the conversation, again, it goes back to being sympathetic and empathetic of what your client's expectations and desires are.
Yeah.
Very good point.
And one other thing I mentioned, The one thing I really found, and again, 8 years of doing this, is sellers really most of the time, want an agent who's just going to take on a hand and guide them to all the pieces that they need. Like, hey, I've got a guy that can help you with this. I've got a lady that can help you with this, whether it's staging or getting projects completed. It's just anything you can take off of their plate is going to be beneficial in helping you get that listing.
The California Real Estate Association had a tagline 20 years ago that says, "You've got a life, I'll let you live it."
Yep.
Which means you go do your thing and let me do my job, and I'll tell you when I get a contract.
There you go. The easier you can make it, the more likelihood you're going to have of getting it.
Questions from the Zoom people? Comments? No, they're not. They're all right up there and they're right in. We had a few people here live, and we really appreciate you showing up. Thank you very much. And there will be a KV core training on Friday, and then we're taking Thanksgiving week off, so you all can just rest and relax. And I'm guessing that the governor today at 4 is going to tell us that we can't meet anyway. So we can do it virtually. I don't see you. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job, Victor.
It's-